Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today we're talking about my top 10 lowest ranked board games from 2022. I thought this list would be interesting so that you can see my perspective on these games, what I disliked about them, what put them so low in the rankings, but also maybe some positives from these games so that maybe they might be the right fit for you. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow. And for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's talk about 10 board games that I have ranked the lowest from 2022. Before we begin, I do want to quickly mention that it is not finished yet. I haven't finished playing all of the games that have been coming in from 2022. I have 4 more titles, I believe, that I'm going to be playing: Heat, Tiletum, Frosthaven, and I think it's called Challengers. So those are 4 games that are omitted from this list just because I haven't played them yet. They should be here sometime next week. But I did want to get the ball rolling on some of these best of, and in this case, it's going to be probably my only negative video for games from 2022, but these are just barely missed the cut on this list. I'll put a comment in the comments below if there have been any changes to this list based on those games. But I'm never ever hoping for negative reviews, negative games. I'm always hoping that the next game that I play is one of my favorites. So I'm always going into a game excited and hoping that it's going to be incredible, but if I do need to make some adjustments, I'll make sure to put them in the comments below. So that being said, let's get started with the list with number 10. So my number 10 goes to So You've Been Eaten. Now these first 2 games are actually still in the library because they do have some merit to them. So You've Been Eaten is a asymmetrical 2-player game or solo mode game where you play as either a beast, that is this creature, has this intestinal system that works, a digestive tract that works, or you are a miner that has been swallowed by this beast. And so you are playing as one of these characters. If you're the miner, you're diving into the beast to gather resources and trying to get all of those resources before the end of the game. If you get them all, you win, and then as the beast, you're trying to digest the miner. That's your job. You're going to be playing these cards in your stomach to generate power in order to buy all of these upgrades, and if you get enough upgrades, you overwhelm the enemy. So you're trying to use the cards in your hand to set up sequences as the beast in order to mess with the miner and make sure that all of their upgrades and whatnot are degrading, and as the miner, you're trying to use a dice placement system in order to interact with the beast and be able to pull the different resources as well as different technologies that can help you in the future throughout your experience. So You've Been Eaten is an interesting concept of a game. My favorite part about this has to be the miner itself. It's a lot of fun to do that dice placement, mitigate all of the disaster that's coming, and the solo mode for the beast works really well. It's super easy to run. You just roll a dice, perform the action, and then it's straight back to your turn. That being said, the beast side, playing as the beast in the competitive mode and in the solo mode, is not fulfilling at all. It's my least favorite way to play this game, so I think if this does get played, I'm just going to be playing the miner. So I'm curious to see if people may be excited to try this one just for that asymmetric aspect. It might be one that you try and then move on from, but I don't see this one being played a lot in the long run. So the beast is the giant glaring weakness of this game, but I think the solo mode, particularly the miner, is a lot of fun. So it's my number 10, So You've Been Eaten. My number 9 goes to Townsfolk Tussle. This is a boss battling game with a cartoony art style where you are the townsfolk of Eureka Springs. You're trying to decide who is going to replace this newly deceased mayor, and by determining who's the best at fighting all of these ruffians. You've got this huge boss battling board set up, something actually similar to Kingdom Death Monster, where you have terrain that you can interact with and have different abilities, and then you have your own characters as well that are going to be moving around this board. So you have these miniatures that move around, and on your turn, you're basically going to be moving and then using items, and you have a certain amount of action points that you can use for these items. Now, the thematics of this game are stupendous. My favorite part about this game are the thematics, and that's really why it's still in the library, because the flavor and the art and the entire idea of the different characters and every card has so much flavor in it. Whereas the theme for Townsfolk Tussle shines, the gameplay is a little bit lacking in my opinion. You're going to be doing a lot of repetitive actions, doing a simple move and a simple attack. There's not a lot of varied choice, particularly in the early stages of the game, because you have such limited options on the items that you can purchase and buy. Every time that you are in a town, you can spend money to buy new items, and you're at the whim of the item deck, and you don't have a lot of money to begin with. Once the game progresses and you get some new items and abilities from the different ruffians that you fight, the options will open up because you have different things to spend your action points on, which is a lot of fun. However, it takes a while to get there, and the game is a little bit on the long side with having to fight through 4 ruffians experience, as this is intended to be played in a single gaming session. With that being said, though, I think that the theme overall is a lot of fun. It's great to play with multiple people, as sort of like Gloomhaven, you'll have these mini objectives that you're trying to complete during the actual fight, so there's a little bit of selfishness, and that can add to some hilarity or some funny moments. So there is some things to love about Townsfolk Tussle, and that's why it's still in our library here. That's Townsfolk Tussle, my number 9. Now we get to number 8, and number 8 is where we start getting to the games that are not in the library. And one here, Encyclopedia, is one that I played the most recently. Thank you so much, my friend Ashley, for teaching me how to play this one. In Encyclopedia, you are playing as characters who are creating the first encyclopedia. You're going to be researching animals and then publishing journals with all of the information that you've researched. Now, the things that I like about this game have to do with the animal cards themselves. They're beautiful, and I love the way that the dice system works. Whenever you place a dice somewhere, you're trying to match the different colors, and there are lots of ways to use these tokens in order to mitigate either the pips or the colors themselves. The money is interesting as you're using that to increase the value of your actions, and so you're always constantly thinking about the dice you're using, and sort of like something like Twa, you are actually going to be using the dice from anybody at the table, and if you use opponent's dice, they get a bonus out of that. I like this system because you are always looking at what everybody is doing. Unfortunately, where the game was lacking for me was in the main way that you're scoring victory points, and that's the journal action. When you do the journal action, you're going to choose one of these animals that you've collected in front of you, and then you are going to score as many points as possible with that animal and animals with like features and traits. So as you play, you're obviously going to be collecting animals that share similar traits, features, and continents that they're from. You're going to do your best to maximize these points, and there's no real penalty to holding on and just spamming the same type and just collecting and then saving all of your points for the end of the game. It was something that wasn't super interesting to me. The action system around this point scoring was cool, but what you were actually doing with that action system was not exciting or interesting. So an unfortunate miss for me here with Encyclopedia. That's my number 8. My number 7 goes to Paint the Roses. Now, I'll be honest with this one. My friend Wade taught this to me. I really appreciate the teach, but I cannot remember a lot from this game. It was pretty forgettable, if we're being honest. It's a deduction game. I remember that correctly. Everybody has these cards in their hand. They're these objective cards that you're trying to complete by putting tiles out in the center. But I don't remember anything memorable about it other than that. You have like a piece of paper that you're taking track of notes based on what the players are putting cubes on, because you're giving clues. Think something like Cryptid, where you're giving out pieces of information to help people understand what kind of objectives you're going for. Every turn you're placing out tiles, and you have this time tracker that's ran through that tracks how well you're doing, and that way the queen, she's chasing you can see it on the outside here, the queen is going to escalate her movement as well, and so you're trying to make it to the end by completing as many objectives as possible before the queen eventually catches up to you. So there are these points where the queen speeds up, so you're trying to time that as well. It's a sort of mini game inside of this larger game. But overall, the game did not do anything exciting or super gripping. It felt like a generic deduction game where you are, I'm going to say it even gives me some sort of like Clue vibes, where you're crossing down on this information based on the clues that you're getting, and then you make a guess based on that, based on your odds. And that's kind of it. I didn't really see any other reasons to come back to this one. Not super compelling, and pretty forgettable, and that's why it sits at the 5. Take it or leave it. Nothing terrible about it, which is why it's not a 4 or lower, but it's nothing special in my opinion, which is why it's not a 6 or better. I'm trying to think of a positive from this one. The production is great. It works well. I like the player aid, where you're able to actually track down the information. It makes sense. It works. It's a nice little grid of things that you can cross off, but yeah, that's where I'm going to leave this one. That's Paint the Roses. And as for all of these games, especially as I get lower down, let me know down in the comments why you like these games if you do. I know my friend Ashley loves Paint the Roses, so if you could tell me why you like this, please share with our viewers here. I'm curious what you think about these games in general. So that is my number 7, Paint the Roses. My number 6 goes to the Isle of Cats Explore and Draw. This is a roll and write version of the Isle of Cats. You're going to reveal a bunch of cards in the center here, and then on your turn, I believe you pick a row or column. It's been a couple months since I played this one, but you're picking a section of these. Think something like Cat Lady drafting. After you pick those items, you're going to put them onto your grid on your boat, just like you would do in the original Isle of Cats. Every time you take a blue card, that's additional scoring that you're going to check down on this little sheet on the side here, and you can take as much additional scoring as you want, as well as the different pieces. So you're always balancing whether or not you're going to take scoring versus the pieces to actually fulfill the scoring. That's actually my favorite part about this game. I love games where you're able to take on multiple multiple objectives because it feels so satisfying when you're able to do them all. But the reason that this left the library is Isle of Cats, the original one, is just a better game. This one is missing the core aspect of the tension in the original game, and that is the drafting. Because every single option is out in the middle here, there is no tension between the cards that you're taking, between the cards that you might potentially get back. And that's what drove the interaction between the other players, and this one is definitely missing that. I loved having to pick the cards for initiative to determine which tiles you're actually going to be able to grab. I like that there were finite amounts of the different special tiles like treasure and Oshaks in the middle of the board, as well as those objectives. Only one person can take that objective, which is going to give them specific implications for the entire rest of the round. This is missing that soul of the original Isle of Cats, and I think that's a shame. So this is one that has left the library already. That's Isle of Cats Explore and Draw, my number 6. My number 5 goes to My Father's Work. This was taught to me by my friend Fun. Thank you so much for learning this and teaching. It is an app-driven game where you play as a family who over generations is going to be creating these terrible experiments. At its core, My Father's Work is a contract fulfillment worker placement game. You're going to be placing characters on the board to gain resources, usually a couple at a time, and then you're going to use those resources to complete these large projects. You have a main central board where some of your workers can go, and then you'll have your own private board where the other portion of your workers can go. You're trying your best to play as many cards as possible so you can build out these larger experiments, gain these generational bonuses so you can have effects that carry on, and then ultimately win the game through a mix of story events and victory points from the cards that you've played. Now, my favorite part about this game is the way that the story progresses the board itself. You can see it in the background here. I don't want to show it to you because of any potential spoilers if you play, but there's a spiral-bound notebook in the back that you are going to flip to based on certain portions of the story. I like how it opens up more spaces, more options, and as you play, the board evolves. Awesome concept, awesome idea. Now, the reason that I don't like this game is there's several reasons. The first one here is it's super long and it's constantly interrupted because of the application. A lot of times you're going to stop playing and someone will have to read maybe 2 or 3 minutes of text. And everyone while that's happening is just sitting down. I don't think that the text is particularly bad or particularly amazing. It's just kind of there, and I don't think the story that it tells is necessarily super compelling. It's a little bit of a thing that you're just sitting there and like, okay, let's get through this so I can actually get to the game itself. And that's pretty unfortunate because that's one of the driving forces of the game, and it screeches the game to a halt, which is a shame. The other thing that I found was that some of the story events are completely random and can throw the game. There are certain events that can happen that mean that somebody just has lost a significant portion of their actions, and these can even happen during the late game, which can be crushing, where you just out of nowhere are defeated based on this event that has occurred in the application. It's pretty frustrating when it happens, and a big swing like that is something that I dislike in games in general, particularly when it's something you can't really plan for, or maybe you did try to plan for it, but because of some way that the app worked, there was nothing you could do about it. It's a little frustrating to be at the whim and mercy of the application. And lastly, the core itself is honestly a little generic. You're gaining resources, using resources to fill contracts, and aside from that, there's not a lot of other exciting things happening until the game evolves. This game feels like it's a bit of a bare-bones system where the evolution of the game throughout it is going to be adding those interesting aspects. And to be fair, it does do that. As you play, you are getting more interesting things the more and more you play, but at its core, it's simply not the most interesting game in the world. So My Father's Work was a little bit disappointing in general, but I do like that evolving board, and I like to see it in more games. I know that things like the Almanac Road, I don't remember what it's called, but that one uses a similar mechanism, so I'd like to see this in this evolution of worker spots in more games. So that's my number 5, My Father's Work. My number 4 is going to Merchants of the Dark Road. I played this one like a year ago now. Merchants of the Dark Road has you playing as these merchants who are traveling the Dark Road. You're going to have a caravan full of goodies, and every turn you're going to be using one of your dice to push one of these dice in this middle area up to take a bonus action, and then you're going to use that dice to move your caravan on this rondel on the main game board. Based on where you land, you're going to be able to get more equipment and put it into your caravan. You can pick up these different customers that will be riding with you that you can sell items to, or you can even go out and set onto the Dark Road and deliver all of these goods and or these customers based on wherever they're intending on traveling. And my favorite part about this game is the fact that when you go on the Dark Road, everybody else at the table can actually join you. They can jump onto your caravan and they can share in whatever trial trials and tribulations may occur. And the person who's actually taking the action to go on the dark road gets a bonus from this. They're going to be getting more dice and more options for the actions that they take. However, if you do take the dark road, all of the people who are jumping on with you will get to take that option first. So you have the trade-off of getting potential potential good rewards, but with lower odds to do so because the other players are probably going to take those strong dice. So that's my favorite part here, is that interaction when we actually go onto the dark road. But unfortunately, this game has a lot of issues when it comes to the flow of the game and the monotony of the game. You're doing a lot of cyclical actions. The actions themselves are not particularly exciting, and they take a long time to resolve. You have that step of placing your dice, pushing it up again, moving on the board, interacting with the board, moving the wheels. It feels quite fiddly as you're moving all of these pieces to achieve something pretty minimal. Nothing to stand out about this one. I think I'm rating this one at a 5, where it's not a bad game. There's nothing terribly flawed with it, but it's also there's nothing flashy or exciting. I do remember this one pretty clearly now that I'm talking about it here, and it's not one that I think I'll ever come back to, honestly. It's one that does a simple contract fulfillment with no real variance in your gameplay or choices. You're just making the best of each single turn, and it's a bit clunky as you try to move through the sequences and steps to do so. So that is my number 4, Merchants of the Dark Road. My number 3 goes to Familiar Tales. This is a campaign game where you play as familiars who are taking care of a baby. This baby is going to be one of your objectives in the game. You're trying to protect it, heal it, nurture it, and you're also trying to complete the scenario objectives as well as fight any enemies that show up on this map. One of my favorite parts about this game is the map board itself. You flip open this book, it has points of interest, it has all the information and tracking information for the enemies on that book. So the setup and the way to play it is awesome. There's another great feature of this game is that it is voice acted by some incredible cast members, and it is a joy to listen to. You can pull it up on your phone, listen to it, and I love narration in story games. 2022 was one of the best years for narration. We had Oathsworn, and this game have amazing narration in them. So that being said, though, the game itself, I think, suffers from too much freedom. And what do I mean by this? There's no real pressure to push you into taking actions or making tough choices, particularly in the first half of the game. I didn't finish this game. I played, I don't know how many hours, but I played through half of the entire campaign game, and I felt that there was nothing driving me to make interesting or challenging decisions. One of the big instances of this is the resource gathering as well as the combat fighting. Every time that you play this game, there are going to be some creatures that are going to be pushing you to try to defeat them, and that's what you got to do. If there is an enemy on the board, you have to send your people in there, you have to go defeat it, and when you do so, then it's cleared off the board, and you now no longer have anything that you have to deal with. And this was apparent in every single mission that I played. There was no pressure to push me to doing anything else other than defeat the enemy, go collect every single resource from the board, because there's nothing stopping you from doing so, and then after you've done that, make sure that you are picking up all of the different extra story events or any other events that could occur on the map before you decide to end the mission yourself. Now, there is a driving factor that's supposed to put pressure on you, and it's the baby itself. You need to take care of the baby and nurture the baby, but there are ways that you can decrease, like the discontent marker, I think is what it's called. It's this little cloud track on the right here. You can decrease that by taking an action, and that only moves, I think, every 3 or 4 actions when there's no enemies on the map. And so all you had to do was you spent 1 action to push it down, and then your other 2 actions, you just did whatever you wanted on the board. Not that exciting, a little boring, and just this cyclical process to be as efficient as possible because you needed to get these resources to buy new cards as well as to participate in as many skill tests as possible, because that's how you get experience, is by rolling a specific die face during a skill test. You were trying to maximize the amount of different skill tests you were taking, the resources you were getting, so you could increase your characters so you could deal with those enemies more quickly. So unfortunately, the freedom here is what was bringing this game down, and it became something boring that I was not that excited to play, even though I was thrilled to hear the rest of the story. So I think that in the future I may sit down and just listen to the story and just kind of move through the options on the website. right, but who knows when that will actually come. I wish the game was a bit stronger and had those tough decisions that are apparent in these other campaign games, but that's why Familiar Tales ended up not sticking in the library, as it is a campaign game that has those flaws. So that's my number 3, Familiar Tales. My number 2 goes to Trudvang Legends. This is a story game where you play as a party of adventurers in the Nordic universe of Trudvang. You play a bag building system for your combat, and you're going to be constantly making story decisions that are going to allow you to change this map by sliding cards into it. You have a map board which tracks the different locations you can interact with, and an adventure board which tracks the enemies and other upgrades and abilities that are going to be in this persistent world. Now, one big thing that changed with Trudvang, and the reason that it's a little bit lower, super low on this list, is the entire game was changed during the development process. They did a complete overhaul on the characters, the combat system, and I didn't know what the original one was, but I think that it might have been for the worse. Now, what do I mean by this? When you actually go for a combat here, you're going to be taking these different runes out of your rune bags. You'll have these cards that'll be out on the board that have specific rune requirements, and then you're going to draw a handful of runes at a time, place them on your different cards, and you'll do that over and over again in order to interact with these different abilities that you have. You're trying to activate as many possible because based on what you actually interact with and activate, you get to deal damage to the different enemies, and these are marked by these bestiary cards. You deal damage to them and hopefully defeat them so you can gain experience points, and you can use those XP to get new upgraded cards for your deck. The biggest issue for this game to me is the way that you are collecting runes into your bag and the forced grinding that you have to do, not just for a campaign, but every single time you play this. When you travel around the map, a lot of the locations that you go to are going to give you the ability to spend some of your in-game currency. I forget what it's called in particular, but you spend the currency to add these tokens to your bag, and then during that scenario, you now have more of a specific type of token in your bag, which increases your odds. And this is a bag building game with some negative chips in it, so if you do pull out those chips, it will have negative consequences on you. You are going to want to make sure that you fill your bag with these good runes. So you'll have a lot of different cards that use a lot of the same runes, so you want to be traveling to the areas each time you play to build your bag up with these specific runes. Now that sounds cool in a campaign game where maybe these are lasting, but every single time you play Trudvang, you have to reset your bag back to normal, and then you're going to start off with your bag of runes and then start putting more stuff into it. So every time you play this, you have to participate in grinding in order to build your bag up to where it was in the previous mission, and then the story itself is going to be pushing you to go through these different points of interest and fights, and each of the fight does not really have any consequences, and the fights themselves take quite a bit of a long time to resolve, as every time you do a challenge, you'll be diving into that bag, pulling different chips, and then placing them on your different abilities, using those abilities, putting them in the discard pile. Then the enemies will do their attack, usually will do some damage, and if you are killed, there's no big consequences for actually being killed. What it does is it puts a negative card into your deck, and that card can easily be removed by just participating in more skill challenges. It reminds me a bit of the same feeling that I got with Familiar Tales, where you don't have any real pressure to pushing you into certain situations, but this has a huge flaw with it where there are some situations that you can get into that are completely unwinnable and make it so you cannot even progress. In particular, the first mission has a position where you can just straight up get stuck in a lock and you just lose. You just stay there. You can't lose because the game doesn't actually have loss conditions in it. You just play until you get tired of it and reset the entire thing. In particular, there are ways that the enemies can add the negative chips into your bag so that you have so many of these negative chips in your bag because you didn't do enough of the grinding in the early stages where you just keep on drawing these negative chips and you don't make any progress, and that results in you adding more negative chips to your bag. I'm surprised that even with all of this additional playtesting that there are still issues like this in the game. I'm curious to see if the expansion content will change this or make it a little bit better, give you more mitigation, have extra errata. I think that this game had clearly some issues in the development process as they have completely overhauled it, and I'm wondering if it received the correct playtesting it needed before coming out. So as you can see here, we went on with the Legendary Pledge, where you have the extra stretch goals, got the expansions, but have not had a chance to play it. They only have delivered that base game. I don't know if this is one that I'm going to wait on to see if any of the additional expansion content improves it, because I just have had no desire to pull out the original game, but it's stuck in the library right now because I'm waiting for the rest of that content to arrive. So I'm curious, I'm figuring out, what do you think I should do? I think, should I go ahead and try to sell this off? I don't know if anybody's going to buy this game, the original base game of Trudvang, without the extra Kickstarter stuff. That's one of the boons of backing these CMOD products, is usually you can sell them off with the Kickstarter exclusive and retain most of the value. It's a bit of a frustrating one to be on, and as you can see, I've spent a lot of time here. That's number 2, Trudvang Legends. I guess I should talk quickly about something that I do enjoy about this game. I think that I'm going to say that the map itself is interesting. So the way that you are able to slide in the cards into the map, it means that every time you want to play, you just open up the board, and the board is exactly as you left it. I love that feature. It makes sense. It reminds me a little bit of a mixture between the flipping book, where you just open up the book to your next scenario, but in this case, it's a constant map of the world. Now, if only that those spaces weren't just grinding spots where you're going to be getting new runes to your bag that you have to use every round, that's a different story. But that's my number 2, Trudvang Legends. My number 1, though, goes to the game that I'm the most frustrated with and the most disappointed with. This is John Company 2nd Edition. I do want to preface this by saying that I've only played the solo mode of this game, but I was so disappointed with the solo mode experience, and that's why it's the lowest here. Now, in John Company 2nd Edition, you are running the East India Trading Company, and your goal is to have your family be in as many positions as possible to try to get the most influence throughout the company and gain the most profit as well as the most prestige. So you're going to be doing this through having your family members being the head positions of the different offices. And each of these offices, as you can see this little red line here, are going to be in charge of running the different phases of the game. So at the start of the game, you're going to be in control of some of these offices, and if you play that solo mode, you are going to have the enemy controlling different factions that are taking control of the other offices. So you are generally going to hold about a third of those offices based on your starting cards, and then the enemy is going to hold 2/3. My favorite part about this game is just how different it is. This game uses mechanisms that I haven't seen in any other game, period. There's a lot of creativity in the way that the different offices work, in the way that they are tied with each other, and the consequences of every single office and how it trickles to each of the others. So if you own an office, and whatever decision you make, it affects every single other aspect of the game, and I love that. The interconnectivity of the entire system is incredible. Now, that being said, the reason that the solo mode in particular is so low here is I feel that I am just reading a rulebook and going through a manual the entire time I play this solo mode. The way it works is, in that first initial phase, you have opportunities where you could potentially lose offices on the very first turn of the game. Now, I've played through the solo mode of this game twice, and both experiences were frankly uninteresting, not fun, and frustrating by the end of it. Just wanted to stop. And that's one reason this game has not really been played in the multiplayer setting yet. I don't really feel like playing it. It's got a huge rules overhead for something that has so many small interconnecting pieces, and a lot of people don't want to learn how to play this game because of that overbearing rules teach. So that's a bit of a frustrating aspect of this, and usually solo games are fine because if you play the solo game enough, you're going to solidify that teach. But that is not the case in this solo mode. You are not playing the game for, I would say, 90% of the solo mode. The AI has a flowchart, an additional book. It's called the Crown Handbook that you're going to be going through that tells you exactly what to do for their phases. And that's so frustrating to me, where I am sitting here not playing the game. I am following a manual, a rulebook, a thing that tells me, hey, you do this, you can do this, this is what you need to do. It's so frustrating because I'm not playing. I am just running a manual. It feels like I'm just doing upkeep for the entire experience. And that is, frankly, completely uninteresting, something that I never want to return to, and I don't think I'll ever play this game solo again. There are points in the solo rulebook where you're able to use these red cubes here to interact with the AI, and that seems like it would be a boon. Awesome, I have ways to interrupt the flow of what the enemy is going to be doing. However, you only start the game with 6 of these tokens, and that just means that every time you are resolving the enemy's steps, you have to stop and look at the options and read the options for each of the different phases and look at how many cubes that you potentially have, how many cubes that the opponent has, how many they're going to spend. It adds even more steps to these points in the rules that just make it such a bear to actually play. I'm I cannot believe this. I thought that this was something that I was going to be able to play, sit down, and actually play through this process, but this game is playing itself, and that's what it feels like. Yes, there are going to be ways that you can learn how the system goes. The more that you play, you're going to learn when to spend those cubes. You're going to find ways to get into the company and be able to take over some of those offices, and then hopefully by the end of it, you are playing most of the game because you occupy the most offices and are able to actually do the actions. But as of right now, that has not happened. That is not the case, and it's not something that I want to sit through and work my way, claw my way to figuring out and putting myself into that position. Something like Pax Pamir 2nd Edition, something like Root, with the way that Cole Worley is able to make it so that it's so easy to run the opponent AI turn, and then it's back to you and you're able to make impactful decisions on the board and see those implications and actions work. I love that. I think Cole Worley is an incredible designer, and I love his solo modes in Root and Pax Pamir 2nd Edition in particular, but in this game, the fact that I'm going through this huge flowchart every single, not round, but every single action and step of this huge multi-step round, it is incredibly frustrating, and it's not something that I ever want to go back to. So that is the most disappointing thing in general that I've experienced in 2022, and I think that this is one that's going to leave the library extremely soon. It's in the library right now because I do want to play it at least once with the multiplayer setting, but it just hasn't happened. Nobody wants to play this game. I've brought it up. I've spent like 2 hours to make sure that I know how to play it when I'm ready to teach it and ready to go for it, but it does not get tabled, and I don't think that it's going to. So unfortunately, I think that John Company's 2nd Edition isn't going to be leaving the library. It's a little bit bittersweet because I love the theme. The mechanisms are so fascinating and interesting because they're not replicated in games anywhere, and the interconnectivity of it all is so fascinating. So I hope that I can get this one played, but that's my number one lowest ranked board game from 2022, John Company 2nd Edition. And that's it. Those are all of the board games that were the lowest rated from 2022. What do you think about these board games? What do you think about my points? Have you played these games, and what do you think of them? How do they rank on your best of or worst of 2022? I'd love to hear what you think and what you think about just everything that I talked about here in general. But thank you so much for watching SideGame Strong.